Hi, welcome to the overview section for the new Office EMR check-in checkout dashboard. To access the check-in checkout dashboard, users will utilize iScheduler and look on the toolbar for the check-in out icon. Clicking that button will launch the check-in checkout dashboard window. With that screen loaded, you can see that my default filter has pulled a list of patients. First, let me review the sections that make up the dashboard. In the upper left corner of the screen, we have the filter section. In the filter section, this displays the schedule date that we're viewing and the patient list filter that we're utilizing. By default, my filter will display. However, I can utilize the drop-down arrow to toggle between any number of filters and change the display based on my needs. For the purpose of this training, I'm going to go ahead and just look at those patients coming in today. Once the filter is set, the patient list is displayed in this area. Patients can be searched by utilizing the search box and keying in the name when the list is lengthy and they may not be visible on the screen. Once you find your patient and select the patient, you load the last section of the screen, which is the patient view section. In the patient view, we pull in the patient consolidated header that you see throughout Office EMR. That includes the MML status icon and the ability to access our patient flags module if you're utilizing that new functionality as well. Additionally, you're going to see the patient setup screen icon and drop-down menu that you're used to seeing when you're viewing the patient in iScheduler like this. Notice to go to that patient, I just simply clicked on this link, and that loaded that patient in iScheduler for me. If I needed this patient in eDocuments or EMR, I would utilize that drop-down menu. One other noteworthy mention is that when you access patients through the dashboard, they are captured in your recent patients list. There are 3 settings areas for each of the tabs, the check-in and the checkout. Check-in and checkout function exactly the same, but they have the ability to access and set up settings based on the functionality of checking in, and then separately based on the functionality of checking out. So if I'm in the check-in tab and I access my filters, I'm going to notice that they say check-in for each of the filter settings, where if I'm in the checkout tab, I'm setting settings for my checkout tab. The reason is that for many of our larger practices, these functions are handled by separate desks and have separate steps within those processes. For smaller practices that have one person that may handle both check-in and check-out, they could conceivably just set up their check-in tab and set their filters so that they're seeing all of their patients. For example, if I go back to this day and I toggle my filter to my all, I can see all of my patients and all of my statuses for those patients. If I only wanted to see patients in a certain status, so maybe I just want to see those that are checked in, I could have filters set up so that I can update my list and only see those patients. So once I have selected the patient, you've noticed that in the patient view area, I have a series of tabs. These tabs represent the various processes from iScheduler that might be utilized in order to process a patient in and process a patient out of the office. The settings area for this, again, we'll go in detail on the settings in separate videos, but as you look at these settings, which I do want to go a little into detail, we have for the patient view 2 different ways users can choose to view the information. The current view is tab, and you can see that my categories are tabs up at the top of the screen. However, if I'm not somebody that wants to click through those, I'd rather just kind of scroll my mouse up and down, then I can move to a list view. And in my list view, I'll get that up and down functionality so that I can use the wheel of my mouse to scroll through, review the data. If everything looks good, just keep scrolling through, expand only those sections that I need. And obviously, if there are sections that you will review each time that you're checking in a patient, then you could set them up to display, as I did these, where they're auto expanded. I'm going to go through the details on each of these sections, but before doing so, I want to just discuss a little more about the filtering and the components on the left-hand side that ultimately lead to the display for the patient viewer, the right-hand side. So the date is always going to default to the current system date and time. Users can, as I did to demonstrate the filtering, go back in time to work with patients, or maybe you're prepping for Friday's patients. You could choose your Friday and filter on those patients to prep those patient charts. So you can look forward, backward in time. You just have to select your date. Once you've selected your date, that date will remain until you either close the window and reopen it, or until you use your calendar to navigate back to where you were. I already discussed the fact that when you click in here and type, it's just searching your displayed patient list for the name or chart, or in a future release, date of birth. It's not in the current release, but it should be in the next release. So you should be able to search through and locate those patients a little quicker. But let's say you have a patient that comes to your desk for whatever reason, or maybe even calls on the phone, is not going to be in any of your filtered data for an appointment today, and you just want to pull them up. You don't need to necessarily, you could navigate over to your iScheduler or EMR if you wanted to, or you can just check global and search that patient and locate them, and then pull up their patient details here. Now, again, you could conceivably have what you need in this view, but you may need to navigate elsewhere, and you'd be able to do that using your menu here. And once you're done with that search, all you have to do is uncheck global. Global is just saying, forget my filters, don't look at this date, don't look at this filter, just search and pull up my patient in my database, right? Once I'm done with that, I uncheck, I go right back to my filtered patients and continue working my check-in, check-out. So the global is intended to just help you locate a patient that's going to be outside of the appointment date filter that you're currently utilizing, and allow you to quickly locate a patient and gather information or navigate somewhere else in Office EMR utilizing that drop-down menu. Next, we have the status change button. So as I'm selected on my patient and I've gone through the different categories and updated my patient, I'll be ready to change them from scheduled to checked in, or whatever my next status is. So I have the option to create a mapping in my appointment status setup, which will be in a separate video. I can create a mapping that when I select a scheduled patient, my next thing I'm going to do is checked in. If that's not true, if you have some other functionality such as arrived and then checked in, you can configure it to read as arrived. But in this case, that's not what I have. And so once I'm done with this patient, I can just hit that checked in button to update the status of that patient's appointment. Should I make a mistake, I can just navigate back to scheduled or whatever status I want that appointment to be in. Again, the statuses and what we see in that dropdown are controlled through the settings screen, and I will be reviewing those in their own separate mini videos. One thing I will point out is for all of these settings, these are all focused on the user that's logged in. So these settings are unique to your user and your user only. The same is true if I were to navigate here. The same functionality exists, just giving me independent ability to determine what things at checkout I might do and what my filters might look like versus being at the check. So I'm going to switch over to the tab view so that I can go through each of the areas that we have set very briefly. And I say very briefly because essentially all the functionality that you're used to throughout these areas when you're going through iScheduler and QuickPay or other drop-down menus to access these various components, all of that functionality exists with a couple of exceptions that I will point out. Starting with that ID tab, which in the list view is patient photograph and insurance cards. That ID tab allows us to see the patient photograph. We've added the functionality to utilize USB cameras to take a patient photo. And while mine is not currently enabled, users will have to provide the permissions for the system to access their camera. They can manage those devices, provide or take away access. And once access is provided, you would be able to capture a patient picture. I can probably capture this black screen. Save that, and that becomes your patient photograph. Additionally, you can continue to scan the way you always have, and there's some additional functionality related to this that I'll go over in just a moment, but you'd be able to access prior scans and access the scans to do cropping and edit that photo. So for example, maybe I want to take out the one that I just created and go to the prior, and so I can do that. I do want to point out that we've added the ability to store a patient ID card the same as we do photograph and insurance cards. To configure that, users with access to the setup portal would have to go under Setup, Quick Scan, and set up that new ID card and indicate where that would be stored. With that setting configured, users could then scan an ID card. And we have a new setting that would allow users to turn on the ability for that ID card to copy over to the patient photograph. So when I scan, if I'm a practice that's scanning ID cards and I want it to automatically copy over to the patient photo ID so I don't have to scan that twice, I can just set up that copy functionality and it'll automatically open in this fashion where it's going to copy whatever I scan for my patient ID card over to my patient photograph. If for any reason I don't want it to do that, I would just uncheck the copy. One other thing to point out is when you have this functionality turned on, if you're scanning anywhere else in the system, you'd have the ability to turn on copy and tell it where you wanted whatever you were scanning to copy to. So it would go to the primary location and to the copy location. Additional new functionality allows you to see your scanned insurance card view for primary, both the front and the back, insurance card for secondary, front and back. And we're also pulling the first plan or your primary plan details from the insurance components here. We're pulling that first plan and that second plan so that you can see the card and make sure that the details are plugged in as you expect them to be. Should you need to update the card, obviously, you would just hit scan, bring in a new card, and you could hit edit insurance and see the scan on the left while you're editing, the scan here in this screen while you're then pulling up the edit insurance and editing those components. Now I am on a smaller laptop screen doing this so that the images are a bit more clear, but if you have a normal size monitor, you should be able to see both the edit insurance and your scanned image on the same screen or on a secondary screen. Moving on to intakes, this is another area of change. And what we've done is we've added in the intake percentages so that you're seeing those. Let me go back one day to bring up a better example of this. Actually, this one's probably the best. And so as I'm looking at the intakes for this patient, I can see those percentages and the color coding of those percentages. So if this was for an active appointment, I'd be seeing that appointment and I'd be seeing those percentages here. If you need the additional details, you can click on this new icon and it will bring up the additional details, including the copay, paid, eligibility, etc. All of the other functionality for your intakes is going to work to allow you to send intakes, send the links, create new, fill them out in Office, do the merging. All functionality necessary for intakes is available. For receipts, same thing. Full functionality is available here. You can create the receipt, print, etc. Here you'll notice that we have those validation checks running. They're the validation checks that you're used to seeing from iScheduler and QuickPay. Once you open that screen, it kicks off that validation. However, here when we select the patient in the patient list, we're running that validation check, and now I can see whether or not the patient has anything that requires updating. Let's see if I find one that does not, and I did. So here, this patient has a green check mark. This is because the patient is not encountering any missing data elements and passes the validation. So as you're looking at these categories, these yellow triangles are essentially indicators that there may be something that needs to happen. Moving back to the list that I was working from just to stay consistent, we're going to go through patient. Patient is essentially that patient setup screen. And each of these areas allow you to view the data, see past visits, next visit, etc. And by clicking into any of these sections, you're drilling into that area so that you can update the information. Print has the indicator because we have items that are sitting in the print queue but have not yet been printed. So someone will want to take action to either print or delete them or handle them however it is appropriate. Authorizations displays any authorization details and may flag those authorizations that may pertain to the current visit. Eligibility, same functionality as you're used to. So really authorization and eligibility are same functionality you're used to. And we're just displaying and giving you access here so you can update or view if it's already been run. Works the same as it does in QuickPay, allowing you to set that claim up. And orders will also allow you to view the details, and it functions just the same as it does in QuickPay. We do give an indicator if there are any orders for the patient that are not yet processed and or outstanding. So when they have open orders, we're going to be able to see those here. Select those details, resize our screen. Look at the various details for those orders, etc. The one area that is a little different, we do give you access to the new and current prescriptions in case the patient asks, did they refill my oxycodone? You can say, yes, I see it was sent on this date, and here are the details, and this is the pharmacy it was sent to. Outside of this read-only view, if a patient needs some kind of prescription created, sent, whatever, you would need to open that patient in the EMR and process that using the prescription module within the EMR. We do not have write access, only read access is available at this time for the dashboard and prescriptions. And finally, access to letters to create new letters, etc., and or print letters, and so on. And that is everything available through the check-in, check-out module. Users will be able to access this once it goes out into production. The only setup necessary will be through these three icons, and you'll watch the brief training videos on that setup. But outside of that setup, users really don't have to do anything other than look at their iScheduler and click on the check-in, check-out icon to launch that dashboard. Everything in iScheduler will continue to work as it currently does, and users can determine which is the best workflow for their practice and processes. Thank you for your time, and we hope that this new functionality will help to improve workflow efficiency for your check-in and check-out teams. Thank you.